I just saw something they didn't want me or you to see. Proof of the Bible's account of the Exodus. Proof not from a person of faith, not from the Bible, but from an ancient Egyptian scribe who was an eyewitness to these things taking place and who wrote about it, which you're going to see is very odd that someone would have written about this. That the 10 plagues happened just as Moses wrote. Blood in the Nile, hail, locusts, darkness, the death of the firstborn. Why isn't this front page headline news all over the world? It should be, except they don't want you to see this either. But today, we're going to share it with you and let you see it for yourself. And while you're watching this, think of all the theys who don't want you seeing this, and smile. This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and with all the tough news in the world and the tough things that are going to be coming upon the world in the next few years, we all need something to build up our faith. And that's why I think God let me see what they didn't want me to see, so I could share it with you. That way, we could all build our faith and prepare for what's coming. So we can have hope in what the Bible promises, even if we face tough times. And that is one reason why you watch this channel. Now today we're going to look at one of the most amazing discoveries having to do with archaeology. Yeah, I know. A lot of secular people say the Exodus story didn't take place, that it's just mythical, because the Egyptians never wrote about the Exodus. But if something as incredible as the Exodus did happen the way the Bible tells us, then there is a God. And if there is a God, they have to obey him, or else they're toast in the end times. So things like this tend to get hidden so people can go on living their immoral lifestyles. But that archaeological evidence that supports the Exodus, that it really did happen, is found in a document called the Ipuwer Papyrus. The Ipuwer Papyrus is now in a museum in Leiden. It's an ancient document dating back to the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, describing plagues that befell those people in ancient Egypt. And what makes this so amazing is how they exactly match with much of what we see in the book of Exodus. And this was very odd, because Egyptians, as we said before, only wrote about their great military victories to make their gods and pharaohs seem supreme. They almost never wrote about their great defeats. But here, in this document, we have 10 lines of poetry describing times of incredible struggle for the Egyptians. Why this writer, Ipuwer, was allowed to write this, and how it survived, we can only guess. Was there such economic, political, and military collapse at that time that the censors and their departments of truth collapsed as well, if only for a short time, which allowed this document to survive? We will likely never know the answer to that one. But the fact this document exists should tell us that this was a unique time in Egypt's history that made a major impact on the writer, a unique time of catastrophes, and a time when Egypt's censorship, as we said, wasn't up to its normal level. So why did Ipuwer write this? The Bible hints at the great frustration the Egyptian people had with their pharaoh at this time. We'll describe that a little later in the video. But all this is pointing to one thing, that this was the time of the Exodus. Before we even look at the document, it's showing us that. But is there other evidence that it came from that time? We can date the Exodus from what we read in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 6, verse 1. In the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he, Solomon, began to build the house of the Lord. So Solomon began to build the temple 480 years after the Exodus. This is a really big deal, because we know from other sources that Solomon began to build somewhere around 960 BC. Putting these two dates together, we get a date for the Exodus of approximately 1440 BC. Now, was Ipuwer's papyrus from that time? That would be important. Some scholars have tested it with carbon dating, which, isn't all that accurate, and other different scientific tests and say it was sometime between 1550 BC and 1300 BC. So it's in the ballpark. In fact, it's right in the middle of that proposed time period. And there are a number of scholars from textual analysis who believe from the style of the writing that this was written somewhere around 1400 to 1450 BC, somewhere in that range. So it's right what we're saying. This was very likely from the right era. And it is describing an eyewitness account of what appears to be plagues and catastrophes that have hit his country. These are the first two plagues or catastrophe. Listen to this, quote, "There's blood everywhere. Lo, the river is blood. One thirsts for water," unquote. So those are the first two lines of his poem. Okay, the river is turning to blood. That should sound familiar. If you look at Exodus 7:20 through 21, it reads, "Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded. In the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, he lifted up his staff and struck the water in the Nile, and all the water in the Nile turned into blood. And the fish in the Nile died, the Nile stank, so that the Egyptians could not drink from the Nile. There was blood throughout all the land of Egypt." Not only does this match what Ipuwer said, but also the order. The Nile turning to blood is the first plague in both lists. And if the river was blood, the people would be thirsty naturally. Look what Exodus 7:24 said. "And all the Egyptians dug along the Nile for water to drink." So they could not drink the water of the Nile. Now, you would imagine the next plague would be frogs, just like the Bible, right? Well, it's not. Does that eliminate this document from being accurate? No, not in my mind at all. In some ways, I think it strengthens it as an independent account, separate from the Bible account, a second witness to the same group of events. So why are frogs missing? Well, did Ipuwer just lump all the following plagues, frogs, lice, flies, pestilence, and boils, into the first plague? Did he just think these things were all the result of the water having turned to blood? We don't know, but his third and fourth plagues are in the Bible, and they're the Bible's seventh plague. So let's look at these third and fourth lines from Ipuwer. It says, quote, "Lo, trees are felled, branches stripped. Lo, grain is lacking on all sides," unquote. Now, the Bible stresses the causative agents, hail, locusts, etc., because it is God who sent the hail. Ipuwer, however, stresses the result, trees felled, grain lacking, because this is the impact on his nation and his people. We know from the Bible that there's a hailstorm that took place as one of the plagues. And what it can do is strip the bark off trees or even knock trees down if it's the worst type of storm. It can strip leaves, break branches, etc. Exodus 9:24 reads this way, "The hail struck down everything that was in the field in all the land of Egypt, both man and beast. The hail struck down every plant of the field and broke every tree of the field." That should sound familiar. That is exactly what Ipuwer was describing as well. The crops of the field destroyed, trees knocked down, bark stripped right off the trees. The hail can destroy everything, and apparently it did. Exodus 9:31 says the flax and the barley were struck down, for the barley was in ear and the flax was in bud. In the fifth part of this plague, Ipuwer describes another impact. Quote, "Birds find neither fruit nor herbs." End of quote. Again, Ipuwer is describing the impact rather than the cause. But in his first four impacts, it matches the Bible exactly. And as you're going to see, it does in the fifth as well. In the follow-up to the plague of hail, in Exodus 10:15, it says, "The locusts came upon all the land of Egypt, and settled on the whole country of Egypt, such a dense swarm of locusts that had never been seen before, nor will ever be again. They covered the whole face of the land, so that the land was darkened, and they ate all the plants of the land and all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Not a green thing remained, neither tree nor plant of the field throughout all the land of Egypt. I mean, there's that paralleling again. Ipuwer is paralleling exactly what we see in the book of Exodus, that there's no fruit or herbs, specific things that the Bible mentioned as well. But again, Ipuwer is sticking strictly to the impacts of what happened, not to the cause. So that doesn't make it different. It just means he was looking at it from a different angle. The sixth thing that is talked about on this papyrus also follows Ipuwer's methodology of mentioning impact. It says, quote, "Groaning is throughout the land, mingled with laments," unquote. When the Egyptians' firstborn were killed, the Bible tells us that everyone in the land, everyone of the Egyptians, was in tears. Exodus 12:30 reads, "And Pharaoh rose up in the night, and he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not someone dead." Again, as Ipuwer writes, groaning and lamenting throughout the whole land. And in Exodus 12, we have the same thing. Okay, let's go to the seventh part, because this is really getting interesting. And here's what Ipuwer had to say, quote, "Lo, many dead are buried in the river. The stream is the grave. The tomb became a stream. And who puts his brother in the ground is everywhere," unquote. This is talking about the Egyptians having to bury a lot of people. And it was very interesting that it looks like there was so many dead, they just were throwing people in the river and letting them be carried out to the ocean. A fact that the Bible doesn't include, but I found very interesting. And this, of course, fits because after the Passover, it says there were dead Egyptians everywhere, and they had to go out and bury them. So in Numbers 33:4, it reads, "The Egyptians were burying all their firstborn, whom the Lord had struck down among them." Again, we see the Bible describing these massive burials that were taking place all over Egypt. And again, Ipuwer and the Bible seem to be on the same page. In the 8th line of his poem, Ipuwer writes, quote, "All is ruin," unquote. Wow, what an understatement. The Egyptians have really been going through a lot, and they are getting so frustrated with Pharaoh, who's preventing the Israelites from going out into the wilderness, which is, of course, causing all these plagues. Pharaoh won't let them go. And it says in the Bible that even the Egyptian staff under Pharaoh were saying, "Hey, let these people go already, will you?" In Exodus 10:7 it says, "Then Pharaoh's servants said to him, 'How long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not understand that Egypt is in ruin?'" Well, guess what? The key thing here is that all is in ruin, and that's exactly what Ipuwer writes. You see the same words in the Bible and this document, ruin. So, this is a hint of why Ipuwer might have been writing a negative piece. The Egyptians were blaming their Pharaoh, so why protect his image anymore? And I mean, when you read that from Pharaoh's servant saying to the head of the nation who could probably have him killed, "Do you not understand that Egypt is in ruin?" I mean, it really shows the level of frustration these people had in Pharaoh at that time. Now, Ipuwer has a 9th point, and he says, quote, "The land is without light," unquote. Now, this goes against one of the Egyptian gods. The sun god Ra of the Egyptians was a god of light, and God, of course, was turning the lights out. In Exodus 10:22 through 23, we read, "So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was pitch darkness in the land of Egypt for 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days, but all the people of Israel had light where they lived." That's a pretty remarkable story, yet Ipuwer writes the land is without light. Again, perfect match. Then we get to the last one, Ipuwer's 10th, which is really amazing. Quote, "Gold and lapis lazuli, silver and malachite, carnelian and bronze are fastened on the necks of female slaves." Unquote. You don't dress up slaves that way. So something very strange has happened here, because he's saying the wealth of Egypt is now in the hands of its slaves. And this is part of the catastrophes that Ipuwer is writing about. It's the last straw in his mind, maybe even more than the death of the firstborn. And I'm sure you wouldn't be surprised to know that this is in the Bible as well. In Exodus 12:35 through 36, after the Passover has taken place and the Israelites are getting ready to leave, it's there that we read this. "The people of Israel had also done as Moses told them, for they asked the Egyptians for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing, and the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. So they let them have what they asked, and they plundered the Egyptians." It sounds like Ipuwer is describing this exact incident, because now, all of a sudden, we have slaves, who are the Israelites, that are adorned with all the wealth of Egypt, that it's being given to the slaves. This was the final straw to Ipuwer. But he doesn't seem to understand why it's happening. He doesn't write about that. One thing his papyrus doesn't discuss that the Bible does is that each of the plagues was God's judgment on one of the gods of the Egyptians, proving that they were inferior to the God of the Bible, Yehovah. If you want to learn about this, click right here to keep watching and discover how the Egyptian gods were really fallen angels, actual beings, and how this judgment of the demonic realm will recur in the end times. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.